Who leaves a message on a napkin, hoping no one will ever find it? Clara Monroe thought it would disappear like everything else she once ran from. But when Elias Hart, the quiet coffee shop owner with a past of his own, picked up that folded napkin during closing time, the handwriting stopped him cold. What followed wasn't a dramatic reunion or a name remembered out loud. It was a secret conversation between two strangers who already knew each other. Not by face, not by name, but by the words they never got to say until now. And what began with one note beneath a cup would rewrite everything they thought they'd buried. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. It was always quiet after the evening rush. The scent of espresso lingered in the brick-walled cafe like a whisper, and the soft hum of the fridge filled the silences between Elias Hart's thoughts. He stood behind the counter, polishing the last ceramic mug even though it didn't need polishing, more out of habit than necessity. The day had ended like any other, mild chaos between 8 and 4, laptop warriors and takeout seekers, tourists marveling at the reclaimed wood furniture. But now, as the door clicked shut behind the final customer, Elias let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The air felt gentler once the lights dimmed to closing mode. He moved to the small wooden box perched on the counter, nestled between the tip jar and the old receipt printer. It looked like a recipe box, vintage, faded blue, paint chipped at the corners. Above it, handwritten on a little chalkboard. Take one, leave one, for those who believe in words. It was something his sister would have loved. The kind of whimsical, heartfelt detail she always encouraged back when they used to talk about the cafe as a dream, not a reality. Now it stood as a tribute, or maybe a promise. Most of the notes were harmless, quotes from dead poets, mini doodles, confessions scribbled by bored teenagers. He read them when he needed a reason to smile. Tonight, he opened the box just to do the usual end-of-day glance. But tucked beneath the folded corners and floral paper scraps, one napkin stood out. It was plain white. No flower doodles. No pink gel pen. Just ink. Slanted, sharp, yet strangely careful. If you find this, tell me I wasn't wrong to leave. That was it. One sentence. But Elias stared at it like it had cracked open something he didn't know was still fragile. The handwriting tugged at a long dormant nerve. It wasn't quite familiar, but it felt like it should be. He ran his thumb over the edge of the napkin. A part of him wanted to throw it away, call it a prank. Another part, the quieter part, the one he usually didn't listen to, told him to sit down. He did, and just sat there, elbows on the worn oak counter, the napkin flat before him like a challenge. He didn't write anything back that night. Instead, he slipped the napkin into his notebook, went home, and dreamed of corridors lined with books, snow outside the window, and someone just out of frame. The next morning, he came in early. Earlier than usual. He made 1 cup of black coffee and stared at the note again. Then he pulled out one of the thick paper coasters from behind the register, flipped it over, and wrote, "What if you weren't wrong, but you still lost something important?" He placed it in the box. No name, no signature. But as he closed the lid, his pulse quickened in a way he hadn't felt in years. The note was gone by that afternoon. He noticed it when restocking the stirrers. The box was slightly ajar and the coaster was missing. In its place, a new one. Then maybe it's not too late to find it again. If you're still looking. He smiled without meaning to. This time he responded faster. That evening, just before closing, he wrote, "I didn't think I was, but now I'm not so sure." And so it began. The exchanges were always indirect, but unmistakably directed. Sometimes a few lines. Sometimes a question. One day, do you think silence can be louder than words? Another day, what would you say now if you had the chance to rewrite one goodbye? Elias didn't know who was writing back. That was the point. But something about it, about her, felt achingly familiar. One rainy Tuesday, she left a line that stopped him cold. "I used to write poems in the back row of Dr. Maynard's lectures. You once borrowed my pen." Elias sat down so hard his stool creaked. That was over a decade ago. He had no right to remember it that clearly, but he did. Senior year. Architecture electives. A quiet girl with ink-stained fingers and 2 large sweaters. She never raised her hand, never talked much. But she wrote constantly. Poetry, maybe? He'd always wanted to ask. She vanished one day before finals. No one explained why. He never asked. Now he wished he had. He didn't respond right away. He paced the cafe, made 3 cups of tea, and drank none. His reply, finally, was brief. Then I owe you a pen. And maybe more. No signature. No reveal. But his hand shook when he placed the note in the box. She didn't write back for 2 days. Those were the longest 2 days of his adult life. He pretended to be fine, serving cortados, fixing the leaky back sink, pretending he wasn't watching the box every hour. Then finally, just as the last bell above the door jingled closed one night, there it was. You don't owe me anything. But maybe you remember what you never got to say. He folded the note carefully and slid it into his back pocket. He remembered everything. But he had no idea how to say it now. She started writing longer notes. Not always more personal, but more intricate. Her words wound around ideas like vines, thoughtful, restrained, then suddenly sharp. One day she left a question that made him stop in the middle of counting spoons. Do you think people can miss each other before they've even truly met? He stood there, one hand resting on a jar of cinnamon sticks, replaying the question in his head until it felt like an echo. That evening, he answered with something simple. Too simple, maybe? Yes. Every day. She replied by morning. Then why do we wait? He didn't know. He didn't pretend to know. But he wanted to. For the first time in a long time, he wanted to understand the things that couldn't be measured in margins or memories. By the end of that week, she left a new kind of message. Not a question this time, but a challenge. Describe the moment you started forgetting how to talk to people. He answered without overthinking. The day I stopped thinking anyone was listening. She didn't respond the next day or the next. And he felt that absence like a thread pulled too tight. On the 3rd day, she came in. He didn't know it was her, not at first. The bell above the door rang the same as it did for every customer. A cold gust followed her in, trailing the scent of rain and crushed leaves. She wore a long coat, the kind with old buttons and worn sleeves, and a scarf wrapped twice around her neck. Her hair was darker than he remembered, pulled back in a loose knot. No makeup. No umbrella. She looked damp, windswept, and like she didn't want to be noticed. She stepped up to the counter and didn't meet his eyes. Chamomile tea, please, she said softly. He nodded. To stay or to go? She hesitated. To stay. He poured the hot water carefully. Watched the steam curl. Set the cup down with a small smile. Seat by the window's free. It's warmer there. She nodded once, still not quite looking at him, and walked to the far table beneath the hanging bulb that flickered when the heat kicked on. She sat with her back to the room and her hands wrapped tightly around the mug like it was anchoring her. Only when he turned back to the counter did he see it. A napkin on the edge of the tip jar. Folded twice. Tucked just enough to blend in, but not enough to disappear. He opened it the moment she looked away. You asked about silence. I think I've carried mine long enough. His throat tightened. He glanced up, but she was staring out the window now into the gray misted street as if waiting for something to appear from it. He scribbled fast. You're not invisible. Not anymore. And when he passed by to wipe a nearby table, he slid the note under her saucer. She didn't react right away. Just sat there. Still and steady. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, she reached for the napkin, unfolded it, and read it. He saw the shift in her shoulders, the pause in her breath. She stayed for another 20 minutes, left without a word. No more napkins. But the next morning, he found a small pressed flower inside the box. Nothing else. The following day, she returned. Again at the same hour. Again with rain in her scarf. This time, she ordered a cappuccino and sat closer to the counter. When she left, She tucked a napkin under her cup. You always noticed everything in class. You just never asked questions. I used to think that meant you already knew the answers. He laughed aloud when he read it. The kind of dry, almost disbelieving laugh that startled the new barista midwife. He waited until closing to write back. I didn't know the answers. I was just afraid mine wouldn't be good enough. That night he couldn't sleep. He thought about the old lecture hall, about the way she used to sit in the second-to-last row with her head tilted as if listening for something no one else heard. He remembered her handwriting, her quiet, the moment she lent him her pen, and the way she didn't ask for it back. He had kept it for weeks, before realizing that maybe she hadn't meant for him to return it. The following Tuesday, she came in again. This time she smiled. Not wide, not bright, but honest. And this time she sat at the counter. "Chamomile again?" he asked. "Let's be brave," she said. "Americano." He raised an eyebrow. "Living dangerously. I figured we've earned it." He handed her the drink. She reached for it with both hands, warming her fingers. Then, almost casually, she said, "You never asked my name." He met her gaze. "Didn't want to ruin the mystery." She tilted her head. "And if the mystery wants to be ruined?" He hesitated. "Then it has to ask first." Her lips curved. "Do you remember the last day of class?" "Barely. I skipped it. I waited at the library, just in case you'd come by." He blinked. "I didn't know. You weren't supposed to." "I would have gone," he said softly, "if I'd known." She took a slow sip, the steam fogging her glasses. "Maybe now you do." She stayed until closing that night. No more napkins. Just their voices, cautious but present, like the first few lines of a song neither had sung aloud before. And when she left, she didn't look back. But she left her scarf. Not by accident. He found it draped over the chair, soft and damp, still carrying the faint scent of cedarwood and ink. He folded it carefully, set it beside the register. Underneath it, another note, just 5 words. "What if I never left?" He didn't answer with words this time. He just sat there, long after the lights were off, her scarf in his hands, and let the question fill the room like the warmth of something returning. The scarf stayed behind the counter for 4 days. He told himself he was holding it for her, that she'd come back, ask for it, smile that barely their smile again. But each night when he closed the shop and the scarf was still folded beside the register, something inside him quieted and ached. She returned on the 5th evening, just as the sky turned lavender behind the apartment rooftops. This time she brought a book. No coat, no scarf, just a dark green cardigan and a paperback copy of The Little Prince, worn and softened by time. She didn't wait for him to greet her, just slid onto the stool at the counter like it had always belonged to her and opened the book to a dog-eared page. "I used to read this every year," she said without looking up. He dried a mug slowly, letting her voice wrap around the room. "You know the part where the fox says, 'It is only with the heart that one can see rightly'?" He nodded. "I always hated how right that line is." She finally looked at him. "Still think your answers wouldn't be good enough?" He paused. "Not for the world, but maybe for you." The moment held, long enough to almost say something else. But she turned a page instead, and the spell dissolved into steam and evening music. When she stood to leave, she didn't take the book. "This stays," she said. "If I don't come back, it's yours." He stared after her long after the bell above the door fell silent. She returned 2 days later. No words, no pretense. just sat down, picked up the book, and said, "Did you read my favorite page?" He nodded. Twice. That night, they closed the cafe together. It wasn't planned, she simply hadn't left, and he hadn't asked her to. She helped him sweep the floor, wipe tables, teased him about his disorganized sugar station. And when the door was locked and the chairs flipped upside down, she lingered near the window, her fingers tracing the outline of the fog on the glass. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. He nodded. "Do you believe people can find each other twice?" He didn't answer at first. Just walked over, took the rag from her hand, set it aside. "I think," he said carefully, "that if they were ever meant to, they never really lost each other." She closed her eyes, just for a second. "That's a nice thought." "It's more than a thought." A long silence. The kind that asks something without saying it. He finally said, "You don't have to keep hiding behind napkins." She looked up sharply. "What makes you think I'm hiding?" He gestured gently toward the box behind the counter. "That's where the words go when people are afraid to speak them." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. "And you're not afraid?" "Every damn day," he said. "But I'm more afraid of missing something I already almost lost once." That was the closest either of them had come to saying it. But she didn't answer. Not then. Instead, she stepped back, gave him a look full of something unreadable, and left. The box stayed empty for 3 days. Then on the 4th, she came back with a small envelope and slid it across the counter. "Don't open it here," she said. "Not yet." He didn't ask why. Just nodded. She didn't stay for coffee. He waited until midnight. The cafe was dark, silent except for the low hum of the old fridge. He sat at the corner table, flicked on the small reading lamp, and opened the envelope. Inside, a drawing. Ink and pencil. Simple lines. It was the cafe counter. A man behind it. A woman with a scarf on the stool. 2 cups between them. And in the bottom corner, a date 10 years ago. She had drawn them. From memory. From then. And with it, a single line. "I never forgot your silence. Maybe I'm ready to hear what it meant." He read it 3 times. Then he locked the cafe, walked home in the cold, and stayed awake until morning. The next day, he left a note in the box. "It meant I didn't know how to ask you to stay." She came back that evening just before close. He didn't speak. Neither did she. Instead, she handed him a paper cup with his name written on it, his actual name, not the one customers sometimes shortened to Eli. Inside, another napkin. "I stayed anyway. You just didn't see me." His chest tightened. "I see you now." She looked down, then up again. "And if I told you I've known it was you since the first note? I'd say I suspected. But I didn't want to scare you." "I wasn't scared," she said. "I was waiting." "For what?" "For the right version of you to show up." He nodded, slow. "Is this him?" She stepped closer, reached up, smoothed the crease on his collar with careful fingers. "It might be," she said. "But I'm not done listening yet." Then, without another word, she turned and left. But this time, she didn't leave behind a drawing or a napkin. She left behind a key. A small brass key with a tag that read, "Studio, 4th floor, 11th and Waverly. Saturdays after 10. He didn't know what waited behind that door. But he knew who would be waiting. And for the first time in years, the idea of unlocking something didn't feel terrifying. It felt earned. The studio didn't look like much from the outside. 4th floor, no elevator, stairs that creaked like they'd been walked by stories heavier than his. Elias paused at the landing, the brass key warm in his palm, the number 4A etched beside the doorknob like an invitation and a warning all at once. He didn't knock. He unlocked the door slowly, pushed it open, and stepped into a world built from paper and ink. The space was small but bursting. Canvases leaned against every wall, some framed, most not. Shelves brimmed with sketchbooks, watercolors, jars of mismatched pens. The windows were fogged from the inside, smudged with fingerprints. In the middle, under a soft yellow lamp, stood a drafting table, covered in illustrations of quiet streets, bookshop windows, park benches, and faces half turned away. She sat cross-legged on the floor, barefoot, hair braided loosely, her glasses slipping down her nose as she painted the corner of a page. She didn't look up. "I thought maybe you wouldn't come," she said calmly. "I almost didn't," Elias admitted. "But then I remembered what you said, that you stayed, even when I didn't see it." She wiped her brush clean and finally met his eyes. "And now I want to see everything." She rose without hurry, brushing a smudge of graphite from her sleeve. "It's not perfect," she said, glancing around. "Nothing here is finished. Most of it's messy, unpublished. I'm not here for the published things." She smiled softly. "That's a good answer." He walked slowly past her work, fingers ghosting over edges of frames, the textures of her lines. So many of the drawings looked familiar, though he couldn't place them at first. Then he realized they were all moments from the cafe, from their quiet exchanges, from before. One sketch showed a hallway with lockers, a boy walking alone, shadows trailing. Another, a library table with 2 coffee cups and a book open to a poem. A third, a lecture hall, where one desk was turned slightly toward another. And then he saw it, a full page, ink and watercolor. Him, leaning on the cafe counter, head bent, a note in his hand. The caption below read, "He never said it, but he almost did." His breath caught. "She's been drawing me," he said, more to himself than to her. "I've been drawing us," Clara corrected gently. "From the beginning." He turned toward her. "Why didn't you say something when you knew who I was?" "I needed to know if the version of you I remembered was still real, or if he only lived in the lines I'd drawn." "I wasn't that version back then," he said. "I know," she replied, "but neither was I." A beat, then another. She crossed the room, pulled open a drawer, and handed him a folded sheet of lined paper. Older, creased at the edges, her handwriting messier, sharper. "This is the letter I never sent." He hesitated. "Are you sure? I left it in my bag the day I skipped class. I was going to give it to you in person. Waited all afternoon in the library, and then I just didn't." He opened it. "Read. You probably don't know this, but you made me brave for a little while. You looked at me like I was visible, and not in a way that made me want to hide. I think if you ever spoke to me, really spoke to me, I might stay. So if you're reading this, I guess that means I stayed. But if you're not, then I guess I left before I ever truly arrived." Elias folded it carefully. "I wish I'd seen it back then." "You weren't supposed to," she whispered. "But I think you're meant to now." He stepped closer. "You said nothing here is finished," he murmured. "Do you want it to be?" She looked at him, vulnerable in a way that made him feel like anything but strong. "I want something to begin," she said. And that was when he kissed her. Not the cinematic kind, not rushed or fiery or choreographed, but the kind that happens when two people realize there's nothing left to write that hasn't already been said between the lines. She broke away first, eyes shining. "I still don't want perfect," she said. "I'm not asking for a miracle." "No miracles," he agreed. "Just the truth. The truth is messy." "Then I guess we're ready for it." They sat together on the floor, knees brushing, words quieter now. She handed him a small sketchbook. Inside, on the first page, was a drawing of the cafe's notebox. His handwriting on a coaster. "Maybe I didn't know how to ask you to stay." And under it, in her ink, "I was always waiting for the question." That night, he didn't go home. He stayed in the studio, surrounded by her unfinished lines and his own unspoken apologies. And by morning, something had changed. Not the world, not the past, but the silence. It had stopped feeling like a wall, felt like a beginning. He didn't expect to find her in a bookstore. Not like this. It had been 3.5 months since that night in her studio, since the kiss, since the quiet agreement they never put into words but honored like a secret vow. They never said we're together. They just were. In the way two people become familiar with each other's silences more than their sentences. Clara never asked him to define what they were. She just left space for him to show up. And he did. Not always on time, not always knowing what to say, but always bringing something. A flower pressed in a book. A coffee with her name misspelled on purpose. A napkin that read, "You're my favorite chapter." But that day, he was walking past a little independent bookstore on 11th Street when the window display stopped him cold. There it was, a children's picture book propped on a tiny easel. The title in soft hand-lettered script, "Everything Starts Somewhere," and the cover, a snowy sidewalk, a girl with a scarf, a spilled cup, a man's hand offering a napkin. His breath caught. He stepped inside without thinking. The smell of paper and dust grounded him. A small crowd had formed in the back near a folding table and a string of fairy lights. Children giggled in line with their parents. A woman with bright earrings and a clipboard waved him toward the sign that read, "Author signing, Clara Monroe, 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. He stood at the edge of it all, stunned. Not because he didn't know she was working on something, but because she never told him it was done, or that it was out in the world. She sat behind the table in her favorite cardigan, a pencil tucked behind one ear, signing copies with careful, slow strokes. Her braid was messy, her eyes soft, and when she looked up, she saw him immediately. No surprise, no gasp, just the smallest smile, like she'd hoped he would come but didn't need him to. When the last child skipped off with their book, she stood. "Hi," he said. She leaned over the table slightly. "Hi. You published it." "I did. It's beautiful," he said. "I recognized it the second I saw the cover. I hoped you would." He stepped closer, lowered his voice. "It's our story." "Not quite," she replied, tapping the corner of the book. "It's the story of two people who forgot they were allowed to begin again." He swallowed. "And do they?" She nodded once. "Eventually, but not by rewriting, just by being braver." He pulled a folded napkin from his pocket, placed it in front of her. She opened it. "Read, 'Thank you for not giving up on the version of me I hadn't met yet.'" She didn't speak, just reached for his hand and squeezed. The bookstore faded behind them. The chatter, the music, the signatures, the camera clicks. Later, they stood outside on the sidewalk where snow had just begun to fall. She looked up at him. "I dedicated the book, you know." He raised an eyebrow. "To me?" "No," she said, lips twitching. "To the one who showed up." He laughed quietly. "Same thing. They didn't kiss. Not yet. Not because they didn't want to, but because the story didn't need that kind of punctuation. Instead, she took his hand again and placed the book in his. He opened it. On the last page, tucked into the margin, was a sketch. A man and a woman sitting on opposite sides of a small round table. 2 coffee cups, a tiny wooden box between them, and scrawled beneath it, "Some love stories start with a grand gesture. Ours started with a napkin." He looked up. "Is there a sequel?" She leaned in, her voice close to his ear. "There's a life." And as the snow fell around them, soft, slow, and quiet, they walked down the street with their fingers interlaced, a paperback tucked under his arm, and not a single word left unsaid.